Monday, May 20th. Radnow, Day 3. I'm sitting here yawning and yawning, waiting for my jaw to crack. Not from sleepiness, but from nervousness. 6 o'clock. Nearly time to go. Father Lufra has received his daily facts in continued silence. I performed routine maintenance chores, sleeping, showering, shaving, eating, and so on, and I've brought this diary up to the minute. I've also acquired a very sophisticated and very expensive tape recorder that, set at a slow speed, will put 2 full hours of sound on each side of a single cassette without my having to fool with it. 6:07. I feel strongly that I shouldn't go on till I've found the source of this terrible nervousness. Is it just the fact of playing this double role? I'm like a lawyer trying to represent both sides in a dispute, and struggling to persuade each side that he's trustworthy. Struggling to persuade himself that he's trustworthy. I'm wallowing in a sea of lies while trying to look like someone standing on a solid ground of integrity. True as all that is, however, I know that that's not quite it. What I'm nervous about is something else. What I'm nervous about is B's program for me. It's one thing to check out someone who might just be the most dangerous man alive, and quite another thing to become his disciple. Setting this down in visible words doesn't make the nervousness go away, but it does make further stalling seem pointless. Down there again. B was alone in the subterranean green room of the Schloppeshaus Wanfried, and as I wound my way through the jumbled acres of theatrical antiques, he watched me with a rather sad smile. He was seated as before in his wonderful Regency Bergère in gilt and ebony. I seated myself as before in my wonderful Biedermeier fauteuil, with cushions of faded pale green velvet. A couple of times he said after we'd exchanged polite greetings, in Munich and in my talk last night, "You heard me refer to a colleague, Ishmael, another teacher, but quite a different kind of teacher from me. He was a Maioetic teacher, and I'm not." Maioetic? From the Greek word for... I think I know it, I told him, from the root Maya, meaning midwife. That's right. A Maioetic teacher is one who acts as a midwife to pupils, gently guiding to the light ideas that have been long growing inside of them. I thought about this for a moment, then asked him if one can choose to be a Maioetic teacher, or if this is dictated by one's subject matter. Not every teaching objective lends itself to the Maioetic approach. For example, it would have been inane for Isaac Newton to try to draw his discoveries in optics from his pupils' heads. Inane because they weren't in his pupils' heads. On the other hand, he might have used the Maioetic approach to show pupils why his alchemical studies seemed worthwhile to him. Socrates was of course famous for his use of the Maioetic method. Jesus only dabbled in it, usually as a means of helping people understand their own questions. As when he said, "If it is by Beelzebub that I cast out devils, then by whom do your children cast them out?" Again, I gave this some thought before saying, I assume this means that what you have to teach me is not something that can be drawn from my head. This is largely the case, yes. I showed him the tape recorder I brought and asked if he minded my taping our conversations. It'd be pointless to mind, he replied. The purpose of our conversation is to make a record for your father Lufra. A mosaic. At this point I have nothing like a curriculum for you, said B. You know what a curriculum is, I suppose. I'd say it was a sequence of teaching objectives. A sequence that proceeds on what basis? Presumably it's not an arbitrary sequence. I suppose, ideally, it proceeds from the familiar to the unfamiliar, or from the simple to the complex. A curriculum is structured like a pyramid, building from the ground up. You have to know A to learn B, you have to know A and B to learn C, you have to know A and B to learn C to learn D, and so on. Exactly, but as I say, I have no such curriculum. Rather than a pyramid, I'm constructing a mosaic. The pieces can be added in any order. In the early stages, there's nothing like an image, but as pieces are added, an image begins to emerge. As still more pieces are added, the image becomes more distinct, more definite, so that eventually you feel sure that the basic picture is before you. From this point on, the picture can only gain in sharpness and detail as pieces continue to be added. At last, at last it seems that there are no missing pieces at all, and only the cracks between contiguous pieces remain to be filled, with even tinier pieces. As the cracks between pieces are filled, the picture begins to look more and more like a painting, a continuous whole rather than an assembly of fragments, and in the end it no longer resembles a mosaic at all. I understand. You'll have to transmit what I'm saying in pieces, I think. We'll just have to see what happens. I've had many pupils, but they've always learned simply by hanging around. Circumstances compel us to adopt an untried method. I told him I was willing to try the untried. Here's a piece to begin with. You remember young Heinz and Monica Tito who were here last night? I said I did. They followed me through a complete course of lectures and so have heard at least once everything I'm able to say in public that I feel will be comprehensible. But you don't become a Christian by hearing one sermon, you don't become a Freudian by hearing one lecture, and you don't become a Marxist by reading one pamphlet. If an outsider asks the Titles something that goes beyond anything they've heard from me, they must refer the question to me. They know what I'm saying, but my message is not sufficiently theirs that they can generate answers of their own. For them, the mosaic is only a rough sketch. Frau Dr. Hartmann has twice followed me through my course of lectures and has attended many more soirees as we engaged in here last night. If an outsider asks her a question that goes beyond anything she's heard from me, she may try to deal with it, but when she reports her answer to me, she usually finds out that my answer would have been quite different from hers, sometimes even contradictory to hers. She too knows what I'm saying, but my message is not sufficiently hers that she can generate answers with certainty. She can see the general outlines clearly enough, but the image in the mosaic is still rather shadowy. Michael, on the other hand, has been with me a bit longer than Frau Hartmann, and if an outsider asks him a question beyond anything he's heard from me, he almost never gets the answer wrong, though it will probably lack the depth and the assurance that it would have if it came from me. The message is almost his, and the image in the mosaic is substantially complete, though still a bit vague. Almost as if it were not quite in perfect focus yet. But Sheeran has been with me longer than anyone, and if an outsider asks a question that goes beyond anything she's heard from me, she'll answer without hesitation. Her answer will not necessarily have the same emphasis as mine would have, or be delivered in the same style or reflect an identical point of view, but will have the same authenticity and power, because the mosaic image she's referring to for her answer is as solid and well-focused as mine is. The message is hers entirely. It is much hers as it is mine. She is the message in the same sense that I am the message. B paused as if for a response, and I told him that I understood what he was saying, but wasn't sure why he was saying it. I'm giving you a second look at something. I talked about it at our first meeting, B said. When Jesus departed, he left no one behind who was the message. I managed to suppress an urge to blurt out a wow, but wow was certainly what sprang to mind. That was undeniably true, not in any sense of condemnation, but undeniably true. Jesus left behind no one who could speak with authority, no one who could say this is what's what. There were very elementary questions the apostles couldn't answer with confidence, like, to what degree were those of the new dispensation bound by the laws of the old dispensation? You can hardly get more fundamental than that. In fact, it was St. Paul, a man who had never even seen Jesus, who ended up saying, this is what's what, with more authority than anyone else could muster. More than John or Peter or James, as far as we know, Paul was the message. But even with the writings of Paul and all the evangelists, it still took 300 years of Christian thought to reconstitute Christ's message, to piece together the hints, reconcile apparent contradictions, cut away heresies and lunacies and irrelevancies, and organize it into a self-consistent, coherent creed that more or less everyone could agree on. Even so, I told B that I still didn't quite know what he was getting at. Last night I talked about changing minds. I said that if the world is saved, it will be saved by people with changed minds, not by programs, by people with changed minds. I remember. What you're here for today is to have your mind changed. I looked at him blankly. Right now, Jared, what message are you? I don't follow you. When Jesus departed, he left no one behind who was the message. None of the apostles was his message. You understand what I mean by that, don't you? Yes. But you're not in the same condition as those apostles, are you? No, I guess I'm not. Are you or aren't you? I'm not. Christ's message is yours. If I ask you whether premarital sex is right or wrong, you won't have to call Father Lufra to find out the answer, will you? No. If I ask you whether suicide is right or wrong, you won't have to consult the scriptures, will you? No. You possess these answers as your own, these and 10,000 others like them. That's right. Then I'll ask again, what message are you? I'm Christ's message. A Lutheran minister would say the same, as would a Presbyterian minister or a Baptist preacher. Even though some of their answers would differ from your own, so here you are, and I want you to understand what you're doing here. Yes, I see. Though you probably wouldn't think of it in these terms, Father Lufra has sent you here to become my message. An icy chill skittered down my spine.